So I'm sure you now all expect me to offer you a calm, rational, deeply theological explication of the gospel story we just heard. That series of analogies between the kingdom of heaven and a bunch of seemingly unrelated items. With very little context, rapid fire in the Gospel of Matthew, the kingdom of heaven is compared to a mustard seed, yeast, a hidden treasure, a pearl of great value, and a very effective fishing net. And what do you think of those comparisons? Does that list seem a little maybe strange to you? And if we fixate on the items themselves, I agree that does seem a little strange. In fact, we might be thinking if the kingdom of heaven is like those places, or those objects, maybe there's somewhere else we'd rather go, actually. Because it's very natural for us to fixate on the list of items. I mean, I just put them on the screen, didn't I? Perhaps each of us is already imagining now which one can I most readily get my hands on? But of course, if we read the story just a bit more carefully, and thank you, Barb, for reading it, and thank you for the editorial. I thought that was my job, but thank you. If we read the story a little bit more carefully, we see that the analogy to the kingdom of heaven is not actually to those items, but rather to those items as they are put into action. For example, the kingdom of heaven is not compared to a mustard seed. It is compared to a mustard seed that is planted, watered, tended, and that over time develops into a tree that birds can rest in. The kingdom of heaven is not compared to yeast. It is compared to yeast that a person took and mixed with flour until all the flour was leavened. The analogies to the kingdom of heaven are not to inanimate objects. The analogies to the kingdom of heaven are to action, commitment, hope, even taking risks. Taking risks, you say? What risks? Well, think about the person that found the one pearl of great value and sold all they had to acquire it. And now they imagine that they discover the pearl is actually fake. The kingdom of heaven involves risks, trust me. Or at least the pursuit of the kingdom of heaven involves taking risks. Because the kingdom of heaven is that place where we invest our time, energy, money, passions, even our affections. The items are not important. It is our investment in the project where we find the kingdom of heaven. Well, this is very unfortunate, I have to tell you. This is midsummer. And the last thing you want me to hear me talk about is how we have to be more active and more invested. You don't want to hear me drone on about action when we just want to sit back, hide from the heat, keep cool. Don't worry, I'm with you there. But maybe if we restrict our discussion to simply the mustard seed, we can have a message that will not interfere with our summer ease. And I'm sure you've all heard countless sermons where the main idea behind the mustard seed analogy is that small and insignificant things can grow into things that are substantial and significant. So we can do something very small, and over time that can become significant. And that's a nice sounding message that demands really nothing from us. Perhaps that's a very good summer message. But I think that message undersells the story. I suggest the point of the mustard seed analogy is not simply that small things can grow. In the story, the seed grows so the birds can find a place to rest. Growth is not a good thing just because. Growth is good because it enables others to benefit, like a bird that can find a place of safety and rest. Which is why I selected this image for the week. And here we see a bird resting in a perhaps unusual place in an upside down mop head. And presumably the owner of the mop just placed it on the balcony so that the mop would dry out. But the bird took advantage of the space, added some twigs, and created a safe place to create a nest. The bird just saw a place to nest and then created a nest there. The owner of the mop did not place a nest there hoping a bird would come along. It just happened. And nobody plants mustard seeds in order to provide shelter for birds. It just happens. In fact, things like that happen all the time. And just as an aside, historically, mops actually were invented the exact same way. Because early mops were made at home using worn out clothing, bed sheets, other items. Some mops were made out of ropes that had been worn out. Mops themselves are a great example of repurposing. So it's really fitting that a bird sees a mop and goes, I'm home. But given all that, what exactly is the kingdom of heaven being compared to in our reading? Or more to the point, what do those comparisons say about the nature of the kingdom of heaven? Because the kingdom of heaven is also compared to a treasure and a pearl of great value. Quote, the kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field, which someone found and hid. Then in their joy they go and sell all they have and buy the field. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant in search of fine pearls. On finding one pearl of great value, they went and sold all they had and bought it. What do you think of those metaphors? I confess they leave me a little bit cold, to be honest with you, because on the surface, it sounds like only rich people can find the kingdom of heaven. And we have all heard countless sermons that speak to the idea that the kingdom of heaven is so valuable, we should make every possible sacrifice for the kingdom. But again, I think that message undersells the story, actually, because both of those examples, buying a valuable treasure and buying a pearl of great value, are kind of written like they're only for individuals. But is the concept of the kingdom of heaven an individualistic idea? For me, that doesn't quite make sense. I don't care how nice your image of the kingdom of heaven is. If each of us ended up there all alone, would that feel like heaven to you? To me, the word kingdom implies community, space not only for us, but for friends, families, and others. So perhaps the metaphor for buying treasure works, but in a collective way, because creating community has its own costs. To create open, engaging community, we need to pay a price. The person entering the community can come in for free, but the community itself has to pay a price in order to be welcoming. Community has to pay a cost called giving up complete control. Because being open to strangers in our midst means we have to loosen our sense of control, at least a little bit. As we just read in Ephesians, what did you call it? Lumpy? Quote, it is lumpy. Quote, Jesus came and proclaimed peace to you who were far off and peace to those who were near. For through them both of us have access to the one Spirit, to God. So then you are no longer strangers and aliens, but you are citizens with the saints and also members of the household of God. Ephesians speaks to a wall that once divided people coming down. Quote, Jesus had made both groups into one and had broken down the dividing wall, that is, the hostility between us. Jesus abolished the law with its commandments and ordinances, so that he might create in himself one new humanity in place of the two, thus making peace, and might reconcile both groups to God. When the book of Ephesians was written, of course, the two groups in question were Jewish followers of Jesus and non-Jewish followers of Jesus. So when we read this story today, we are invited to consider what barriers are affecting us today. In what ways do we separate people today? And are those barriers actually helpful to us, or maybe not? Mary Ellen and I have been going through some office documents and deciding what material should go to the United Church archives. And in the process, I've learned a bit of history. And what I have learned is that Chapel in the Park has always been a place with a passion for taking down barriers. So just to bring your mind back, here's 1956. Anyone recognize that? That's Thorncliffe Park. You can see the racetrack and the edge of the Don River, which seems to have no trees at all. It looks like the moon. Anyone remember that? Were you around then? If we go fast forward only 10 years, it looks like this, which is still really interesting because you can see them all, but you don't see the two, what are they, 95 and the other. Um, it's a little different. In the very early days, Thorncliffe Park had just been converted from a racetrack into an apartment-only community. And at the time, that was seen as a real barrier to churches, actually, because a traditional parish was defined by a geographic area where you could actually go and knock on people's doors. An apartment only community was actually considered a very new reality, at least in Canada. Chapel in the Park, which was actually the name used even back in the 60s, I'm kind of blurring the history here, but Chapel in the Park responded by listening to the needs of the community and responding to those needs. At one point, we helped create, under the driving force of our minister, Reverend Michael Quiggin, the Thorncliffe Information Post. Anyone heard of that? It was a hub for sharing information about the community and among other things that they shared. And T&O does that task very well today. As one of the first churches in the neighborhood, we also broke down denominational barriers, providing space not only for Roman Catholic services, but for weekly Anglican services as well. And our relationship with the Roman Catholic community through St. Edith Stein Roman Catholic Church continues today. And I join a long list of ministers who see these other churches as partners, not simply renters. And today we have the opportunity to break down other barriers. We are very uniquely situated as a United Church, planted in what has become a predominantly Muslim community. That reality in Canada is actually a rare gift. So let's broaden the conversation a bit, since I have to get back to the title at some point. I think what we've been talking about and circling around in modern language is a concept we call belonging. Well, who needs belonging? We all do. Me, you, me, them, everybody. No, nobody knows that line from the Blues Brothers movie. Okay, forget it. What is belonging? Well, according to the Institute of Othering and Belonging, quote, belonging is a powerful vision for creating a world where every person is seen, valued, and empowered. A world where each individual's humanity is recognized and celebrated, and the planet itself is included in the circle of human concern. If ever there was a time to double down on building this world, it is now. Now, what do you think of that definition? I have to say, to me, it's a bit over the top, and it paints with a really broad brush. I mean, declaring what belonging looks like to all people, even though the definition appears to be written by people of privilege. And I suppose this is not surprising. The Othering and Belonging Institute was founded in 2010 as the UC Berkeley Institute, clearly written by people of wealth, clearly written by a committee, clearly written by academics. But I share the definition anyway as a starting point, because I do agree with the focus. I believe in a world that values belonging, and that belonging will be created one community at a time, starting with each of our own communities. In fact, starting with each one of us. Believe it or not, researchers have actually studied belonging. Obviously, there are many cultural overtones to what belonging means to anyone, but some observations seem to be universal. And if you don't like this observation, please let's talk about it later. But one person who has studied belonging extensively is Brené Brown, and I want to share just one of her teachings. And she would start with the question, what is belonging? And then instantly say, well, let's start with another question, which is, what is the opposite of belonging? Now, many people would say the opposite of belonging is feeling isolated and lonely. But Brown's research demonstrates that the opposite of belonging is actually what we call fitting in. Because fitting in is when we come into a group of people and we decide, okay, what do I need to do? How do we need to act? What clothes do I need to wear in order to fit in? Fitting in means I'm willing to pretend to be someone else in order to not rock the boat. Fitting in is about us choosing to change, or at least our outward expression, in order to be accepted into a group. But Brown says belonging never asks us to change who we are. In fact, Brown puts it this way, the true belonging does not require us to change who we are. It requires us to be who we are. This is a two-way street, because we cannot belong anywhere until we belong to ourselves first. Belonging requires self-knowledge, which, as we all know, is much harder than it sounds. The quote from Brown, quote, "Belonging is not about having a seat at the table. It's about showing up as I really am, whether or not there is a seat for me in the first place." Belonging demands that we are willing to be ourselves, even if it means risking being shunned and not accepted by a particular group. Belonging is not easy. We have to risk being alone in order to be who we truly are. Churches can be places where we can find belonging. And church is sort of special too in lots of ways. Over the years, I belonged to a number of groups, but most of them, from Costco to the Y to a union, you have to show up with your credit card like this. Many groups you might belong to require us to pay to play. But church is one place where we are simply free to walk in the door and find community. We're all free to walk in the door and find belonging. Finding belonging is beneficial for our emotional and spiritual well-being. It's about finding dignity in our own lives. It's about knowing you belong somewhere. It's about knowing there's some space you do actually belong. Some space that when you're not there, you're actually missed. Some space you can truly be yourself. In Ephesians, it said that Jesus has broken down the wall that divides us from each other. Sadly, in the last 2,000 years, new walls have been constructed. But the invitation from Jesus persists, and we can find belonging as we ourselves contribute to taking down the walls that separate us from one another. What walls do you want to take down in your own life? What walls in society do you want to help take down? Belonging is a gift we all deserve. Amen.